So at the end of the last passage, Ethiopians 10, we had the fish eaters who had been sent to the Ethiopians by Cambyses as spies. The fish eaters return to Cambyses with their report. And here we are now at the beginning of section 11, and they make their report. And what we have here is a genitive absolute, as you can see. Tone, kata, skopone is the genitive, and here's the participle. The verb is angelo, I announce, but can you see it's got a prefix, ap, and the force of the ap there is to report back. When the spies had reported back these things, tauta. Okay, now this is a classic genitive absolute, a participle in the genitive and a noun in the genitive. When the spies had reported back these things, how does Cambyses react? Well, interesting enough, autika is the first word, immediately. His reaction is immediate. And that adverb is quite important because you'll see that his reaction is anger, and he doesn't behave in a considered, reflective way. It's an emotional reaction and unconsidered. Immediately, Cambyses. Here's the word for anger, orger. Here's the participle, having made anger. Notice that Herodotus here, he could have used the passive, and he could have said having been angered by the Ethiopians. But he doesn't use the passive, he uses the middle here, having made anger. I think I'm going to say something like having indulged his anger, because the suggestion of the middle voice there is that Cambyses creates the anger for himself. It's not justified anger, it's his own natural instinctive reaction, and the suggestion of the middle voice there is that it is possibly without justification. Having indulged his anger, he immediately marched stratuamai against the Ethiopians. Well, that's not the end of the sentence, is it? And then we have ute, neither nor. Now here is the next participle, parangela. Now it is angelo again, as you can see, with a different prefix here, para. But it's not going to be announced here, it's going to mean to order. Having ordered no preparation of food, and we're going to, and Herodotus there is laying the ground quite carefully. We're going to discover that food supplies are going to be a major issue for this Persian expedition against Ethiopia. Having made no provision of food, notice that the Greek says having neither ute made no provision. Udemian is feminine, going with paraskeuen. There's a double negative there. We would say having made neither any preparation. Greek says having made neither no preparation. There's a double negative, neither no. And double negatives in Greek don't cancel one another out, they reinforce the negative. Having made neither any preparation of food, having neither ordered any preparation of food, nor having given, douce is a participle from didomi, having given to himself. Well, logos, here is going to mean consideration, but the best translation is going to be having given to himself no time to consider. Having given to himself no time to consider that he was intending to march into the ends of the earth. having given himself no time to consider that he was about to march to the ends of the earth. Eskata, neuter plural there. We get the idea that Cambyses' decision to march against the Ethiopians is not considered. It's not a considered decision. It's made immediately on the strength of his initial anger at the report from the fish eaters. He doesn't give any consideration to the food supplies that might be needed and the far distant lands he was about to enter. Then we have an interesting phrase. This word hoya, going with the participle here, own, and it means literally as being mad, emanes. Now, as being mad, we're going to say since he was mad, since he was both mad and not sane. Now, a couple of things to point out. First of all, we have two phrases here, mad and not sane, which reinforce one another. So Herodotus is making it very clear here that he thinks Cambyses had mental issues, shall we say. And the use of the hoya plus the participle own always indicates that this is Herodotus' opinion, the author's opinion. It's not an opinion alleged by other people, what people said at the time. It's what Herodotus thinks now. Okay. Since he was mad and not sane. This is Hose again. When he heard, you'll often find a genitive after akuo in Greek. Here it's sort of when he heard the fish eaters and what they had to say, he set off, I suppose. He marched. He began his march, leading, ago, in fact it's middle here, isn't it, agomai, leading all his infantry at the same time, hammer. The panta, all his infantry at the same time. So it's interesting, isn't it, that Herodotus is stressing here that he takes every last man he's got, which perhaps is, again, an aspect of Cambyses' failure to reflect and to consider, because the whole army, it's a massive army, it's going to take massive supplies to keep it in food and water, and also I suppose he's leaving his rear unguarded if he takes the whole army with him. New sentence, prin. Now prin means before, and it doesn't take a finite verb, prin, like most conjunctions of time. Here is the infinitive. It takes an infinitive, yeah, it doesn't take a finite verb, it takes an infinitive. And it's not a verb form, you'll know, because it's a perfect tense. And the perfect tense isn't part of the GCSE syllabus. So you'll just have to take my word for it. It's, in actual fact, the perfect tense, the perfect infinitive of a verb you know, erkomai, I go or I come. In fact, it's not erkomai, is it? It's a compound, it's dierkomai. And as often in Greek, the subject of an infinitive is put in the accusative case, paradoxically. And here's the accusative case. So it's before the army, Cambyses' army, his army, had gone, had completed, I think, possibly, that's the force of the prefix dia, had completed the fifth part of the journey. Now, by the fifth part, I suppose, well, we can say the fifth part, or we can say, I suppose, 20%. But it's a small portion, that's the point, it's a small portion. Before the army had completed even 20% of their journey, what happens? Immediately, now you can see that the this is connected with sitos, food. Tarsitia, the neuter plural, are food supplies, supplies of food. Immediately their supplies of food failed them. So that shows you, I suppose, the level of the complete lack of forethought and preparation here. If they run out of food having only gone 20% of the way, then their lack of preparation must have been extreme. This looks like an infinitive, guys, doesn't it? But in fact it's not. That's the paragogic nu on the end, used to separate this diphthong a from this diphthong ow. Okay, so in fact it's a normal third-person verb, though it looks like an infinitive ending. Immediately their supplies of food failed them, and after the supplies of food, even the pack animals. Now, we're going to say even the pack animals failed, ran out, I suppose is what we would say. Now that is to say that once the pack animals are the sort of the donkeys and the mules which carry all the food, that do the donkey work, shall we say. And when the food which the pack animals are carrying runs out, the Persians are forced to eat the pack animals themselves, and then they run out. And here's our last word, katestheomena, neuter plural because it's going with the pack animals, which are, as you can see, ta hypozogia, neuter plural. Now you know estio, I eat. Notice this is quite interesting, isn't it? Katestio, it's to eat down. The prefix again, we've had some interesting uses of various prefixes in this passage. The prefix there emphasises the fact that yes, they do actually consume the donkeys. They eat them down. It emphasises the fact that that this strange food is consumed and taken down into their stomachs. And you'll find in actual fact that the same verb, we meet the same verb again in the next section, because the Persians are compelled to eat even more strange food. So we have here now an if clause, and we have a men on the one hand, so to speak, and then here at the end of the third line we have nun de. There's the de, which picks up the men here. And he says that, Herodotus says that if now, nun, having learned this, that his supplies of food were running out fast, if Cambyses, having learned this, interesting verb here, nosimakao, is to change your mind. If he'd changed his mind, if Cambyses had changed his mind at this point, that's what the nun means, and had led back apago, and opisso means back as well, and had led back his army, after his mistake. You may know the verb hamartano. Is that a GCSE verb? I think it might be. It means to make a mistake. This is the noun hamartas, a mistake. After, we're not going to say the mistake, we'll say his mistake. And after his mistake, which took place at the beginning, archethen, I think we're going to have to say something like, after his original mistake, he would have been, or I think probably we'll say he would have proved a wise man. Now notice the an here. It's always used in if clauses to suggest an unreal hypothesis. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Cambyses' wisdom only exists here in the hypothesis, the unreal hypothesis of an if clause, of a conditional clause. So, if Cambyses had changed his mind and had led his army back after his initial mistake, he would have proved a wise man. But, and the debt there is a very strong but, isn't it? But, notice that the noon here doesn't mean now. It means but as it was, and as it was means because Cambyses wasn't a wise man, but as it was, making no consideration, I suppose we'll say taking no consideration, taking no thought, this absence of logos, which of course is an important word, the word, but here it's the idea. It's the logos of sort of logic, thinking, using your brain, taking no thought. That would be a good translation of logos there. Taking no thought. He always. This is a strange verb. This is Amy Ebo, the Amy that means not I am, but the Amy that means I go or I will go. And this is the imperfect tense. He always went into toprosto, or proso means what's in front of you, what's ahead of you. He always went towards what was in front of him. This was Cambyses' natural instinct. He always marched on towards what was directly in front of him, taking no thought. It's I suppose you might applaud it for being determined, but it's the sort of determination whereby men dig themselves even deeper into a hole. And that's what Cambyses is doing here. He's digging himself even deeper into a hole by just marching on and on and on and taking no consideration. Then we switch to the soldiers. So the Persian soldiers, while on the one hand, and then you're going to find here's the epé de, but when. So another men and de. While they were able, this is an unusual meaning of echo here, while they were able to get something, tith, from the land, they survived, I suppose is what we'll say. The verb is zao, I live, but in fact it's dia zao. And the dia, again, is an important prefix there. It means through. They lived through. They managed to get through. That prefix is important there. They managed, might be a good translation, poie faguntes, eating grass. They managed eating grass, which is not much of a diet. But, and again this de is emphatic, but when they arrived at the desert, then what happens? A terrible deed some of them did. Committed, shall we say. Notice you've got the noun ergon, and you've got the verb ergadsdomai, to do a deed. And the repetition there of the noun and the verb together emphasises the fact that the Persians actually did this. Yes, you may not believe it. We don't know what it is yet. It's in the next sentence. But Herodotus tells us they did it. So what were they forced to do? Well, and the Gar there explains this deinon ergon, this terrible deed. Interesting verb here, apokleroo. Apokleroo is to choose by lot. Basically, you draw straws, and the person with the shortest straw, as it were, lot as in L-O-T, they choose by lot. Having chosen by lot one of themselves, genitive plural, out of a group of 10. You can see deca there. This is dekas, decados, a decade, in actual fact, a group of 10. Having chosen by lot one of themselves from a group of 10, they ate him. So we're talking here then about cannibalism. They are forced to eat their fellow men. And there are, there exist stories of well, not stories, it's a fact. You know, I seem to remember a story, a news story about a plane crash in the Andes and the survivors having to eat the dead bodies of those who didn't survive. I mean, there are some instances of in modern history of an army and a general overreaching themselves, and the two classic examples in actual fact in recent history involve invasions of Russia. Napoleon invaded Russia at the beginning of the 19th century in 1812, and of course the Nazis invaded Russia in the Second World War, and both invasions came to grief because, well, essentially because of the Russian winter, which is a massive climactic problem for any army invading Russia, in the same way as the desert, the lack of food and the lack of water is a massive climactic problem for anybody invading Ethiopia. And I'm sure, I wouldn't be surprised if there are stories of cannibalism in one of those two invasions of Russia. Notice again also that it's kata, again, the same verb, katestio, I eat down. So, Cambyses, having discovered this, pionthanomai, a verb you know, this verb you may not know, dado. Dado is I fear, in actual fact, like phobetomai. Fearing, it's an aorist participle in actual fact, fearing allelophagia, which in Greek is eating one another, allelos. I think we're just going to have to say cannibalism. Fearing cannibalism. What did he do? Well, finally, aorist participle, having abandoned the expedition against the Ethiopians, he marched back and arrived. Interesting, it's the historic present, isn't it? Ephigneti. And he arrived in Thebes. Now, obviously this isn't the Thebes that is in Greece, it's the Thebes which is in Egypt. This is Egyptian Thebes. He arrived in Egyptian Thebes, last participle, having lost many to stratu of his army.